Hey guys, it's Chelsea here, and I'm just popping in to let you know about a very exciting offer we're currently providing for our members of the Society at TFD, our exclusive community available to join here on YouTube or on Patreon. As you've probably noticed, we've recently partnered with Advisor.com, a company many of you guys have been loving. Instead of taking commissions or charging exorbitant percentage-based fees like many traditional financial advisors, Advisor.com provides their clients with a top-notch advising team for a fixed, flat annual fee. They put the possibility of financial planning within reach for those who don't already have millions in the bank, because they believe that getting to work with a living, breathing financial advisor should not be reserved for the ultra-wealthy. Their team of advisors work for you, not commissions, and will help you achieve your smart financial goals through planning, investing, tax strategizing, and more. And right now, they're providing an exclusive offer to members of the Society at TFD. Members can get $500 off of Advisor.com's annual fee by signing up with Advisor.com today. This offer applies to both existing members and those who join the Society today. When you join either here on YouTube or on Patreon, you can easily access your exclusive code by checking the Members tab here on YouTube or in the feed on your Patreon app. Remember, giving to TFD directly by joining the Society is the best way to guarantee that we can continue to make the content that you love. And now, in addition to our ad-free bonus videos, office hours with me, and our monthly book club, members can also get $500 off the annual fee with Advisor.com. Click the join button below to join the Society and get your exclusive offer code today. And today I want to talk about something that might be a bit more taboo than the subjects we usually cover on TFD, but is something that has been on my mind as this year's Instagram travel season comes to a close. Something that is probably pretty ubiquitous for all of us on social media is people either in our own lives or that we follow because they are influencers who are living these incredibly aspirational adventures that often involve things like extravagant first-class travel and far-flung locales and chartered yachts and champagne and lobster. And the question becomes, especially for people whose finances we might roughly understand, how in the world are they paying for this? And it's increasingly become a subject on places like TikTok for people to either pose the question or speak honestly about, for example, being in a serious amount of credit card debt in order to finance this aspirational lifestyle. Now, there are many ways that people are funding these extravagant lifestyles that may not totally line up with their income, right? They could come from generational wealth. They could have a wealthy spouse they don't disclose. They could have a distant relative who was hit by a bus and gave them a very large insurance settlement. Or they could be in your garden variety credit card debt. But one really common underpinning of things like the influencer lifestyle that is pretty ubiquitous but very rarely discussed is the phenomenon of sugaring. Now, there are creators who are very open about being sugar babies and who even document the trips that they're taking with their sugar parents, because they're not always daddies, although often they are, and will explain many details about the lifestyle, about the finances, and are very straightforward in disclosing the transactional nature of these relationships. I'll link you guys in the description to a few accounts that do just that. But something that may not be clear to those who have not perhaps been as steeped in the influencer marketing space as I have been for the past 12 years and very aware of the background finances on it, is that many very aspirational influencers, often but not always women, are in some form or another financing this extravagant lifestyle through some kind of sugaring. Now, I want to be very clear in getting into this topic that none of this is meant to judge or demean or degrade anyone who engages in this kind of transactional financial relationship. First of all, I am a tithing member at the Church of Get Your Bag. I also think that even a straight up trophy wife is honestly doing the work. But more importantly, sex work is work, and as such deserves to be valued and compensated fairly. But part of the stigma that often accompanies actions like this is because we don't always realize just how ubiquitous it can be in certain spaces. And with social media relentlessly selling young people, especially young women, a lifestyle that is out of reach for 99% of the population, it's becoming more common than you might think. So let's start by establishing what a sugar baby is. A sugar baby is someone who receives gifts, including cash, in exchange for company, which can include sex but doesn't have to. A sugar daddy, a person who gives such gifts, is typically wealthier and older than the sugar baby. Now, sugar babydom is not exactly something that has been thoroughly researched, but it's such a widely discussed trend that we decided we needed to do a bit of a deep dive into sugar baby TikTok. Note that sugaring happens in all types of relationships, but for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to focus on the most common, which is younger female sugar babies and older male daddies. For the last few years, sugaring has risen in prominence on TikTok, with women sharing their lifestyles as sugar babies and tips for followers on how to find their own such arrangements. As one Refinery29 article put it, from helping viewers craft the best possible profile on a sugar dating platform to teaching them the do's and don'ts of meeting a sugar daddy for the first time, Sugar Baby TikTok offers a complete syllabus on how to successfully and safely get into rich men's hearts and wallets. And sugaring really runs the gamut from simply being a rich guy's trophy dated work functions to going on fully paid lavish vacations and sometimes getting paid on top of the free vacation to basically being a man's girlfriend for pay. Personally, I've been following the day-to-day updates of one such sugar baby who has been essentially documenting every aspect of a recent cruise she took with one of her sugar daddies, the logically named Cruise Daddy. And I have to say, it's compelling TikTok. Streets are saying she might have deleted her account. RIP Cruise Daddy. Now, to be fair, if she did delete her account, I would not be shocked because she was talking about that man in every single video, and all of the comments were so funny. They were like, I hope he doesn't see this. I'm feeling really bad for Cruise Daddy. Cruise Daddy doesn't deserve this. Justice for Cruise Daddy. Now, this all sounds really aspirational, right? Women are taught to value their youth and beauty above all else, so it could be seen as empowering to capitalize on that value to your own advantage, especially if it's just going to be exploited by the society around you anyway. But as with everything money and with being a woman in the world, there's a lot more nuance to engaging these types of relationships. Let's break down some of the different variations of exchanging money and gifts for affection and intimacy. One thing we've also talked about on this channel is the rise of the so-called stay-at-home girlfriend, another phenomenon that has absolutely exploded on TikTok in particular. And it's important to note that on essentially every level except perhaps self-designation, the differences between being a stay-at-home girlfriend and a sugar baby or a trophy wife are pretty minimal. In every case, you are choosing to have your life at least partially, if not entirely, funded by a much wealthier partner. Now, the argument could be made that in the case of a stay-at-home girlfriend or trophy wife, there is a much higher degree of actual attraction and affection, but at least in my experience, this is definitely not the case. As someone who worked at many a country club and for many a wealthy family, let me tell you that I know many, many couples where you look at those two and you're like, girl, we all know why you're here, and it isn't Gollum in a polo shirt. That being said, sugaring still is viewed as much more explicitly transactional, and often when these influencers are talking about sugaring, they're speaking of it as much in terms of a career choice as a lifestyle choice. And in some sense, that actually may make it a more empowering decision than being a quote stay-at-home girlfriend, in the sense that the transactional nature and power imbalance inherent to the dynamic is acknowledged and to some extent exploited from the get-go. And while I don't necessarily know the financial planning of every person engaged in one of these relationships, if you are viewing a sugaring relationship as explicitly a source of revenue and a career choice, it's very likely that you will be approaching it financially with that same level of savvy, as opposed to many financially dependent partners who can find themselves out of luck if the other partner ever decides to turn off the money faucet. But regardless of how each party might define it, many sugar babies claim that it has been a source of empowerment and self-confidence. I think people have this idea that any type of sex work you do it because you're a broken person. But it's the opposite. It did wonders for my self-esteem, says Wendy, 39. Wendy is also adamant that sugar dating goes far beyond and sometimes doesn't even include physical intimacy. Sugar daddies are not just after sex, they want companionship. And while there is much debate as to whether sugaring falls under the umbrella of sex work, and it's certainly not my place to define those terms, it's important to note that while sugaring doesn't always necessarily involve sex, neither does quite a bit of sex work. Often what we're talking about is intimacy work, attention work, affection work. Sometimes people just want to be cuddled or talked to. And many relationships can have a seriously transactional nature, even if it's never explicitly addressed. But let's talk about how sugaring and money specifically intersect, because a lot of the conversation around sugaring is all about charging what you're worth. And again, as I mentioned earlier, converting the incredible social value and capital of youth, beauty, femininity, and sexuality into actual capital that you can use to fund a lifestyle. Or in many cases, do basic shit, like plan for retirement. And this is something we have always preached. In professional situations, ask for what you're worth, because the worst they can say is no. From one Psychology Today article, Seeking Arrangement, a premier site for sugaring arrangements, indicates that the average sugar daddy is 38 years old and earns $250,000 annually, while the average sugar baby is 25 years old and receives $2,800 monthly from their daddies. This entire phenomenon has become so mainstream that one of the cast members on last season of The Real Housewives of Orange County was so open about meeting her husband on Seeking Arrangement that she now actually does advertisements for the website. Get your bag, honey. And as I touched on a bit earlier, sugaring inherently involves putting some effort into your physical appearance and/or behavior in order to attract and keep the attention of an older and wealthier man. The fact of a woman's value being tied to her physical appearance isn't up for debate here. These women wouldn't be hired as babies if they weren't perceived as valuable, i.e., young and beautiful. And sugaring seems to be a result of accepting those societal values for what they are rather than fighting against them. If society is going to tell you that your worth is tied up in your looks, you might as well use that for your own gain, right? For example, this TikTok shares a sentiment that I've seen come up in many sugaring TikToks. No man would choose an ugly woman if he can have a pretty one. Don't choose a poor man if you can have a rich one. Now, we all have to live in this society, and I should note more broadly this economy, in which it's increasingly difficult for anyone to earn a stable living, let alone women, especially if, for example, they plan to have children, which can have decimating impacts on earning potential. But there is also a sobering reality inherent in all of this, which is that sugaring is often a lifestyle choice made when otherwise we aren't making ends meet. Many sugar baby TikTokers don't just talk about the lavish gifts they receive, a whole lot of them talk about relying on their daddies to pay their rent. One example from a Refinery29 article on Sugar Baby TikTok says, after Sugar Baby TikTok videos kept popping up on her For You page, she realized that signing up to a sugaring website could help her attend fashion school and pay back the money she borrowed after losing her job due to coronavirus. But Lou's experience wasn't as positive as she'd hoped for. I thought I could entertain an older guy for a few hours for a little bit of financial help, but Jesus Christ was I wrong. A lot of the men want to scam you or they want to have sex with you. So it's simply a new iteration and a slight variation on a perpetually present dynamic, which is women who are struggling to make ends meet and have to rely on the whims of men, with the knowledge that this is only even available to a limited number of young and conventionally attractive women to begin with. And as I mentioned in the intro, as social media in particular continues to impose a more and more extreme vision of what is normal for us financially, it's not at all surprising that more and more young women would turn to options like this. If it's being totally normalized that 20-somethings should spend every summer on month-long vacations around the Mediterranean, it's incredibly unlikely that without coming from serious generational wealth, you would be able to finance that in another way. Even if you had, for example, an extremely lucrative career, you probably don't have the PTO. And it would be irresponsible to talk about this phenomenon and how ubiquitous it has become without talking about some of the potential dark sides. While many people who participate in sugaring view it purely as a job, it seems like it would be difficult for the line between work and personal life to not get blurred in this context. And some within the industry have also expressed concerns that sugaring is being sugar-coated and that the reality is a lot closer to sex work than people may realize, especially when they came across this idea as a way to get some extra cash or a free vacation. As one Glamour magazine article put it, sugar-coated with a more innocent label, 22-year-old ex-sugar baby Eve worries that young users could be slipping into sex work without even realizing it. No one will give you anything for nothing, Eve told us, having joined the sugar dating site seeking arrangements as a student to get some extra cash before being quickly confronted with the realities of transactional relationships. Sex is almost always brought up straight away, with most sugar daddies having no interest in anything else. Some of the stuff I was asked to do was pretty intense and kink-related, definitely being closer to full-service sex work than the glamorous sugar dating life people are being sold. And you simply can't ignore the power dynamics that exist in any sugar baby relationship, and it can put a lot of women into vulnerable situations. Even if intimacy isn't involved, sugar babies provide a service, placing them in a position that's easily manipulated without education or support. Being separated from sex workers and all of the resources that come with the community, new sugar babies coming in droves from TikTok are stepping into these disguised roles without being prompted to consider if they are okay entering this world, and left feeling exploited once the sugar sours. And because TikTok allows content on sugar babies but not sex work, it becomes more difficult for new sugar babies to access tips on safety and boundaries from people within the sex work community that would be immensely valuable. And this is not to devalue sex workers, but to be honest that there are no workplace regulations in this industry. And it's clear that many sugar babies may not know what they're actually signing on for when they strategically wander into a swanky hotel bar or download an app to find a sugar daddy. Now, I want to address all of this from a purely financial advice perspective, as that's what I would do for anyone in any career. The idea of capitalizing off of your youth and beauty and femininity in these types of relationships is, in my opinion, not a totally stupid move, especially because the value for an hour you could probably get doing this kind of work far exceeds the stagnating wages in many other industries we're likely to enter, and this is not even taking into account the crushing financial debt a lot of us are in just to get degrees. So while I do think there can be some savviness to it, and I certainly have no judgments on anyone who would engage in this, I do think that because the representation of this is often so aspirational, i.e. sugaring allows you to live in a luxury apartment, go on glamorous vacations, dress in designer clothes, eat in beautiful restaurants, it doesn't necessarily encourage a very financially savvy approach to the money you're actually earning. Being paid in a handbag is great, but a handbag is very difficult to convert into a 401k. And if all the money you're earning from this is being spent on a lifestyle that you think you need to be living to justify the work itself, you're basically defeating the purpose of having such exorbitant revenue in the first place. And even if you are on the quote unquote least extreme end of the spectrum, where you're something like a stay-at-home girlfriend, as I've discussed before, even trophy wives usually have the protection of being in a marriage. Now, they may be subject to incredibly onerous prenups, but you do have to step foot into a courtroom and will probably be subject to some alimony and child support and so on. And there are rules about not being able to kick them out of the house overnight, or cut off the credit cards while going through divorce proceedings. In almost every situation, being married to someone on whom you depend totally financially does provide some inherent protections. But being a stay-at-home girlfriend provides none of them. You have no claim to the home you might be living in, to the credit cards you might be authorized to use, to the bank accounts you might share. Essentially, everything can stop on a moment's notice, and there will be basically no recourse. And as the shades of gray continue to get grayer, it's easy to forget that in these hyper-imbalanced relationships, there's always to some extent an aspect of transaction. All I suggest is that we protect ourselves as much as possible and use that money for solidifying a future in which A, we'll have more choices to begin with, but B, we won't be able to rely on that extraordinary youth and beauty we had for a very short period of time. Sugaring has in many ways become more normalized than ever, and is the truth behind a lot of the ultra-aspirational lifestyles we see on social media and feel financially baffled by. But just because it's common, it doesn't mean it's always safe, and flooding the market usually does one thing, which is depress the value of labor. So stay safe out there and save as much as you can.